my name is Francesca Chang, and I will be presenting today on market analysis and product marketing. Just a little bit about me and my experience. I am a travel consultant and a social media influencer, two very different things. I started working with Taiwan's Tourism Bureau about 10 years ago. I started working for them as a writer to promote tourism in Taiwan to English speakers. So I wrote English articles about Taiwan and promoted them to the entire world. I also have worked in the private tourism industry in Taiwan as a digital marketer and community manager and tour scout. My expertise is in digital marketing as well. I have worked as a digital marketer in not just tourism, but also tech and law. I call myself a social media influencer in Taiwan as well, and that's just because I have my own blog here in Taiwan that is focused on Taiwan travel. So as a KOL, I am invited also by the Tourism Bureau to participate and promote Taiwan in that way. So I have the unique perspective in the sense that I am both an insider in Taiwan's tourism industry, working for them, working for the industry as an employee, but then also as an outsider working as a social media influencer and giving feedback and promoting tourism as a private KOL. Okay. So today I will be talking about market analysis and product marketing. So for the agenda today, I will first be discussing international market trends. So basically looking at the world and tourism before COVID happened. So basically up until 2019, as it's important to look at the way that travel was going and see the trends that we can learn from. Secondly, I will be talking about a Pacific Island case study. It's relevant actually to all of us, and it has a lot of lessons that we can also learn from. Next, I would like to give everyone an introduction to Taiwan. I want to introduce Taiwan as a country and also just what it has to offer as a tourist destination. After that, I will be doing a market analysis of Taiwan pre-COVID, so what the Tourism Bureau did before COVID happened and what worked. I will also be talking about market trends post-COVID. Taiwan is actually in a very interesting situation in the sense that even though we aren't allowing international tourists to come here, we are seeing a growth in our domestic market. And so that will be very interesting to see, to discuss as to why and to what is currently happening on the island. And then finally, I will be discussing the Tourism Bureau's current plans, knowing that the Tourism Bureau knows that we are in a unique situation and that domestic tourism is growing. So there are certain things that the government is doing right now to actually promote that tourism. Okay, so in 2019, we saw an increase in international tourists worldwide, 1.5 billion tourists actually, which we count as overnight visitors. So worldwide, that was a 4% increase in travelers. And like I said before, just looking at this graph, actually, across the world, there was an increase in tourists. So every single region, starting with the Middle East, who led the way, they saw an 8% increase in international tourists. Asia and the Pacific followed next with a 5% increase, and this is all according to the UN's World Tourism Organization. Next, we saw Europe and Africa with a 4% increase, and that's actually in line with the world average, right? The entire world saw an increase of 4%. Followed by the Americas. So they saw an increase in tourists amounting to a 2% increase. Now, in terms of countries that saw tourism as a main source market, France. They had the strongest increase in international tourism expenditure among their top 10 markets. And the US, their tourism as a main source market also led the growth in terms of absolute terms. So even though in 2019 we saw a 4% increase across the world in international travelers, 2019's growth was still not as high as 2018, which saw a growth in 6%, and nor was it as high as 2017, where we saw a growth in 7%. Now, the World Tourism Organization speculates there are a few reasons for this minimal growth. One of the causes being uncertainty surrounding Brexit. This definitely impacted European travel. We saw during the year and leading up to it geopolitical and trade tensions internationally. Worldwide, we saw a global economic slowdown. And then, of course, there was the collapse of Thomas Cook and several low-cost airlines across Europe, which all of these causes the World Tourism Organization thinks led to just a 4% increase in 2019, which is lower than compared to previous years. So looking at this graph here, based on the recent market analysis and looking at 2019, it was expected that 2020 would see a similar growth. So here you can see that it was expected that 2020 would see a 4% increase in international tourists around the world. But then, of course, the epidemic happened, and 2020, well, we did not see those trends at all. In fact, we are still trying to analyze what has happened, and I will get into some of those trends that we already do know later, as well as future predictions. So this is the Pacific Island case study that I wanted to mention. This particular study is actually about the Cook Islands, which I found to be relevant to us today. Okay, so the Cook Islands, they decided to use tourism and make it a cross-cutting industry. So what that means is they wanted to use tourism to benefit the country as a whole. They wanted to design tourism so that it could benefit the social parts of the Cook Islands, the environmental aspect of the Cook Islands, as well as the economic development of the country. So let's take a look as to the model that they used to implement this. So from 2016 until 2020, the Cook Islands, they rolled out this plan called the National Sustainable Development Plan. It's in the native language below, and this was the plan that they had developed to develop tourism as a cross-cutting industry, as the slides below before us discussed. So with this 4-year plan, they specifically were targeting tourism to use the industry to help develop 16 different goals, if you will. The plan had 16 different goals that specifically tourism was going to improve. And it's important to note that this plan was aided with the help of New Zealand. Okay, so they rolled out this plan between 2016 to 2020, and with this plan, tourism actually contributed to firstly, economic growth. You can see from the chart here, specifically if you look at the gray line, that's actually tourism receipts and how much it contributed to the Cook Islands' percentage of the GDP. And you can also see from this chart, starting all the way from 2012, actually, that dotted line, it represents the linear trend that the tourism receipts were headed towards, basically the impact that tourism spending had on the island. So under their plan, this tourism did contribute to the economic growth of the Cook Islands. Another one of the goals under this 2016 to 2020 plan was to use tourism to improve water and sanitation. So that was one of the 16 goals, and this is one of the areas where it proved successful. Another one of those 16 goals was to develop sustainable energy and transportation, and that ended up with success in this area. And another thing that the plan wanted to do was to encourage and improve healthy lifestyles of the local people. So that was one of the goals that they reached. Another important thing that this plan to make tourism a cross-cutting industry, another important thing that it did was it helped with the employment rate of the country. So if you look at this chart, this is actually comparing Cook Islands, the employment to population ratio with other countries. And you can see from this graph actually that first, they had a very low unemployment rate because of this plan. That's marked by the orange bar there. And then if you look at the blue bar, that is the employment to population ratio in 2016. So it's much higher than other neighboring countries, 63.3% actually. And what's interesting about this impact is that they saw an almost equal gender split among the employment in the private tourism sector. So actually 51.7% of those employed in the private tourism sector, while this plan was rolled out, they were female. Okay, so now I'd like to give everyone just a brief introduction to our country, Taiwan. I'm a dual citizen, so yes, I am both Taiwanese and American, so I'd like to introduce Taiwan from my perspective and just to show everyone and I guess the world to what the country has to offer as a tourist destination. So Taiwan actually has 5,000 years of Chinese history. 95% of the population in Taiwan today are of Han Chinese descent, so originally came from China. The 5,000 years of Chinese history has actually been very well preserved. We have all of our ancient imperial artifacts preserved at the National Palace Museum. That's a huge tourist hotspot that people from around the world come to see just because of the sheer amount of artifacts. There's actually so many that they are placed on rotation. So when you go to this museum, you will probably never see the same artifacts twice. Another interesting fact about Taiwan is that it's both historic. I was talking about the National Palace Museum and its 5,000 years of preserved history, but it's also a very modern country. So the picture on the left is the Chang Memorial. That's a monument to when the Republic of China or Taiwan government was started. But then on the right, you can see Taipei 101. Taipei is Taiwan's capital, And at the time that Taipei 101 was built, it was the tallest building in the world. It still remains one of the top 10 tallest buildings in the world today. Something unique about Taiwan is that there's still a lively, rich indigenous culture on the island. I'll talk about that in greater depth as I move along through this presentation. But to date, there are 16 tribes recognized on the island. And they have a culture and a history very different from the 95% of the Han Chinese that dominate the island. Another interesting thing about Taiwan is its colonial influence. Taiwan was first colonized by the Dutch. You can see on the right here, that picture is Fort Zeelandia. That was a Dutch port, I guess, at the time. And then on the left, you can see that we still have a lot of Japanese influence left, as it wasn't that long ago that they were here. So we have a lot of Japanese buildings, architecture, food, customs, all influenced by the Japanese, even though we're on the country of Taiwan. So nature and scenic landscapes is a very big part of Taiwan's draw. This picture here is showing Taroko Gorge, and it's one of the world's largest marble cliffs. So a lot of people go here to see this natural phenomenon. You can see how clear that water is. There are a lot of outdoor enthusiasts who come here, not just to look at Taroko Gorge, but to also camp. There's a lot of hiking, a lot of trails in this area. And then lastly, people can actually swim in the river. They can go river tracing and do all that they can fish in the water. So we attract people with this heritage site as well. So there are outdoor activities. Like I mentioned, there are a lot of outdoor enthusiasts that come to Taiwan. Oops. Let's go back. So outdoor enthusiasts come to Taiwan because actually what's interesting about the geography of Taiwan is that we have 268 mountain peaks that are over 3,000 meters tall. We have a lot of people who are mountaineers, hikers who come camp, just hike for the day to see these mountains. Okay, also an interesting thing about Taiwan in terms of the global atmosphere is that it was the first Asian country to legalize same-sex marriage. So as you can imagine, we attract a lot of visitors of the LGBT crowd. They'd like to come to Taiwan for that reason too, because it's safe and it's progressive. Taiwan was actually rated the world's top 3 safest countries by CNN. And that's really an important statistic because we find that we attract a lot of solo travelers and especially a lot of solo female travelers who especially look for safety as one of the number one factors when deciding where to travel to. Taiwan is an English-friendly destination. Although the language here is predominantly Mandarin and it's written in Chinese characters, all of our signs, all of our tourist information is also written in English. In Taipei especially, you'll notice that most of the residents here are almost bilingual in both Mandarin and English. Everyone here starts learning English at an early language, so it is easy for tourists to get around either by talking to people who speak English on the streets or by following these tourist signs that you can see on the slide here. All of our tourist centers that are placed around the country, I'll specifically talk about those. They offer about, I think, 11 different languages with assistance, including English. Taiwan is also a foodie paradise. You can tell from the pictures here, a lot of bloggers who travel around the world always mention Taiwan. They come to Taiwan specifically for the food. you can see, the Food Network or BuzzFeed, all of these online publications that mention Taiwan for their food. There was a Netflix documentary made specifically about one area of Taiwan that focused on traditional food in a city called Jiayi. So I will also discuss more about this foodie aspect of Taiwan and how it attracts people and how the tourism bureau here, markets this. Okay, so now I want to move on to Taiwan tourism product marketing. I want to talk specifically about how all of these different aspects I've mentioned about the nature, food, the culture, everything that attracts tourists, how the Tourism Bureau chooses to market these things to tourists around the world. So from 2017 until 2020, that is when the Taiwan Tourism Bureau decided to focus on sustainability in all of their initiatives in each one of these years' tourism plans to promote tourism. So starting in 2017, the Tourism Bureau deemed that year the year of ecotourism, and that's how they chose to market Taiwan to the rest of the world. So under this plan, the year of ecotourism, the Tourism Bureau crafted 20 ecotourism itineraries, or recommended itineraries for visitors to embark on. And all of those itineraries included visits to the outdoor indigenous villages. I mentioned earlier that we have 16 tribes on the island who have a very distinct and vibrant culture. One of the things listed on all of these itineraries was viewing fireflies in their natural habitats at night. That's a natural phenomenon that occurs in Taiwan and that we invited people interested in this ecotourism to come view. Another interesting part about Taiwan's geology is that we have wetlands, and so exploring the wetland ecology was something that we included in these ecotourism itineraries as well. We wanted to highlight the landscapes of offshore islands. This is going to come up again because Taiwan has actually about 22 outlying islands that are part of the country. And so we wanted to, you'll see later that we wanted to promote these offshore islands, but the landscapes of all of these islands was just one part of these, of the 20 ecotourism itineraries that the Tourism Bureau crafted. We included forest trail hikes on these itineraries, of course, and butterfly and flower viewing was part of the itineraries. So it's important to know that the kickoff year that the Tourism Bureau decided to highlight sustainability in tourism was 2017. That was also the same year that the UN declared 2017 the International Year of Sustainable Tourism. So we are right in line with the UN's initiatives as well. Okay, so I wanted to show you guys a video clip of the promotional video that the Tourism Bureau used to promote this 2017 year of ecotourism. So let's take a look at this video.